Imagine standing before a judge. You've brought your character witnesses, right? You have a list of your charity work, a completely spotless record of public service.
All your best deeds in one place.
Yeah, you slide this thick folder across the bench, and you are fully expecting a commendation, a pat on the back.
Sure, you want the judge to be impressed.
But the judge just pushes it all aside. He looks you dead in the eye, and he says, I do not need to see any of that. Hand me your last 6 months of credit card statements.
Oh, wow. That is terrifying.
And your internet purchase history. Welcome to reformed thinking. Today, we are taking a massive deep dive into a concept that most of us try really hard to keep locked away in a totally secular category.
We really do. We love to compartmentalize that stuff.
Right, because when we consider spiritual devotion, our minds naturally go to, well, prayer, or reading scripture, or singing on Sunday morning.
The safe categories.
Yeah, the safe things. We very rarely consider our bank accounts as part of that. But what if your most accurate spiritual diagnostic tool is not your prayer journal? What if it is your financial ledger?
That shifts the entire conversation in a very uncomfortable direction for most people. I mean, we really like keeping our financial lives in one box, which is governed by standard accounting principles, and our spiritual lives in another box, governed by theology.
It feels safer that way.
It feels completely safe. But the collection of theological essays we are unpacking today, and they focus heavily on Luke chapter 16, specifically verses 10 through 13, this material obliterates that artificial wall.
It really does. So the mission of our discussion today is to tackle this massive paradigm-altering question. The world constantly asks you, how much do you possess?
Right. Society is always evaluating your worth based on your portfolio or your square footage.
Your net assets, yeah. But the text we are looking at flips that completely on its head. It asks the listener, who possesses you?
That is the core issue. We are establishing right out of the gate that money is not some neutral, inanimate tool. It is a strict, unyielding test of absolute allegiance.
To set the stage properly for this, I think we have to look at the theological framework operating behind the scenes.
We definitely do.
If we pull concepts from Chapter 5 of the Westminster Confession, we get a crystal clear picture of providence. The Creator upholds, directs, disposes, and governs all creatures, actions, and things.
All of them.
Right. We are talking about everything from the greatest cosmic events, like the formation of galaxies or the shifting of tectonic plates, down to the absolute smallest details of life.
Nothing escapes that scope.
All of it is directed by His wise providence. So nothing falls outside of that governance, and that includes the spare change rattling around in your cup holder.
Yeah, God's sovereignty extends to every receipt, every minor financial transaction.
Every hidden impulse buy late at night.
That framework is crucial because it means no transaction is hidden from the sovereign lawgiver. But to really grasp why Jesus' words in Luke 16 landed with such explosive force, we have to reconstruct the historical atmosphere he was speaking into.
Yeah, the cultural backdrop is vital here.
It is. We have to look at the economic environment of first century Judea.
Yeah.
Because it was essentially a financial pressure cooker. Understanding that shows why his words carried such heavy gravity in that moment.
I really want to spend some time here because we often read the first century through the lens of 21st century middle-class stability.
Right. We project our own safety nets onto them.
We assume they had basic financial protections or some sort of safety net. What was the reality for the average person living in that agrarian society?
The reality was suffocating. I mean, the Jewish population was living under Roman dominion, and they were burdened by a crushing dual taxation system.
Dual taxation. So they're getting hit from two sides.
Yes, two massive sides. You had the Roman provincial taxes sitting right on top of the population. Specifically, there were two main Roman levies. First, you had the tributum soli.
And what was that one?
That was a tax on land and agricultural produce. So a portion of everything you grew went straight to the empire.
Just right off the top.
Right off the top. And second, you had the tributum capitis, which was a head tax, or a poll tax. It was levied on individuals simply for the privilege of being alive within the Roman Empire.
So they are paying the empire a fee just to exist.
Literally just to exist.
And then they are paying a massive percentage of whatever their land produces. In an agricultural economy, where a single drought or a locust swarm could wipe out your entire yearly income, that sounds incredibly stressful.
It was a recipe for constant low-level panic. You were always one bad season away from total ruin. And then, sitting right alongside those Roman taxes, you had the religious dues.
Right, the temple requirements.
Yes, required by the temple elite in Jerusalem. You had tithes, offerings, and various religious taxes. This combination of imperial and religious taxation bred a highly corrupt environment.
I can imagine. When there's that much money moving around by force, corruption is going to follow.
Oh, absolutely. Because Rome did not have a massive modern IRS-style bureaucracy to collect these taxes locally, so they used a system of tax farming.
Tax farming, that sounds terrible. How did that work?
Wealthy individuals or groups would bid for the right to collect taxes in a specific region. They would pay Rome the required amount up front out of their own pockets.
Okay, so Rome gets their money immediately. They are happy.
Right. But then, those tax farmers were given the authority to extort the local population to make a profit. They could take whatever they wanted above the Roman quota.
That incentivizes absolute ruthlessness. I mean, the tax collector is essentially a state-sponsored mobster shaking down the local farmers.
That is a perfect description. And this system led directly to massive agricultural debt slavery. Peasant farmers were losing their ancestral lands left and right. They were falling into massive, insurmountable debt.
Because they just could not keep up with the quotas.
Right. The class division became extreme. Imagine a bad harvest. A farmer cannot pay the Roman tax, and he cannot pay the temple tax. So what does he do?
He probably has to take out a loan just to pay the taxes.
Exactly. He takes a loan from a wealthy landowner at an exorbitant interest rate. But then the next year, the harvest is just mediocre. He defaults on the loan.
And then he loses everything.
The wealthy landowner forecloses on the property. The farmer now becomes a tenant worker on the very land his family owned for generations.
That is heartbreaking.
It gets worse. Eventually, if things get bad enough, he is forced to sell himself or even his children into slavery just to survive.
Wow. When people are squeezed that tight financially, they look to their cultural and religious leaders for answers.
They want to know why this is happening to them?
Right. They look to the top to see who is thriving and why. So into that specific environment, you have the religious leaders of the day, the Pharisees. What were they telling these starving farmers? And what was their own financial theology?
Well, the historical sources and the biblical text itself give us a very specific label for the Pharisees. They were called philargyroi, which translates literally to lovers of money.
Lovers of money. That is pretty blunt.
It is. They had developed a highly distorted theology to justify their own extreme wealth, while the peasantry starved right in front of them.
How did they justify that scripturally?
They took texts like Deuteronomy 28, which outlines the covenant blessings for obedience. Blessed in the city, blessed in the field, blessed in the fruit of your ground.
Right, the covenant promises.
And they twisted them to create an ancient prosperity gospel. They equated material wealth directly with divine favor. In their minds, if you had a massive estate and a lot of assets, it was visible, tangible proof of your personal righteousness.
So they thought God was literally paying them for their holiness.
Yes, they believed their wealth was God saying, good job.
I see where this leads. Because if wealth equals righteousness, then poverty equals...
Poverty equals divine curse.
Right.
If you were poor, you were marginalized. You were viewed as an object of divine displeasure. They believed your lack of funds, your foreclosure, your debt slavery, all of it was a direct result of your hidden sins.
They blamed the victim completely.
Completely. They said it was your lack of holiness. It was a vicious theological system that allowed the wealthy elite to feel perfectly righteous while ignoring the suffering of the poor right outside their doors.
That makes me think of modern corporate greenwashing.
Oh, how so?
Well, think about a company that operates a massive, highly polluting supply chain, but they spend millions of dollars on a marketing campaign showing them planting trees.
Ah, I see what you mean.
You see an entity that looks flawless on billboards. Their public relations campaigns are perfect. They talk constantly about their ethical practices, and their pristine public reputation is just spotless.
But behind the scenes?
Well, right. If you get access to their private ledger and their actual supply chain, it is totally corrupt. The Pharisees were executing a first-century religious version of greenwashing.
That is a phenomenal way to understand them.
Their public piety hid a private ledger of intense greed.
Their public piety absolutely hid their private greed. And how Jesus responds to this is fascinating. He does not push a secular program of class warfare.
Right. He does not just tell the poor to rise up and seize the farms.
No. He is not a political revolutionary advocating for a Marxist social justice restructuring of the Roman economy. He does not call for an armed uprising against the tax farmers either.
He goes deeper than that.
He does. He executes a spiritual and covenantal indictment against a backslidden nation. He is stripping away the religious veneer of these financial elites to expose their idolatry. He is taking aim directly at the heart of the covenant people.
That context changes everything about how we read Luke 16. It is not just a polite sermon he is giving to a crowd.
Not at all.
It is a direct confrontation with the most powerful, wealthy people in the room. And the way Jesus structures this confrontation is really brilliant. The literary layout of the chapter is known as a chiasm, right?
Yes, chiasm.
Which is essentially a literary sandwich. We have a chiasm of warning here. It opens with the parable of the unjust steward, and it closes with the terrifying narrative of the wealthy man and Lazarus.
And verses 10 through 13 act as the crucial linchpin, holding the entire narrative together right there in the middle.
The literary architecture here is highly precise.
It really is. Let us look at the structure. The chapter opens with a story about a steward, a financial manager, who is caught mismanaging his master's goods.
He is basically caught embezzling or wasting funds.
Right. And the master tells him he is going to be fired. The steward panics. He realizes he is not strong enough for manual labor, and he is way too proud to beg on the streets.
So he comes up with a scheme.
A very shrewd scheme. While he still has access to the ledger, he calls in his master's debtors. He takes a guy who owes 100 measures of oil and tells him to quickly change the bill to 50.
He just slashes the debt in half.
He takes another who owes 100 measures of wheat and slashes it to 80. He is aggressively rewriting debts to secure favors.
So that when he gets fired, these guys will feel indebted to him and let him crash on their couches.
That is the plan. And shockingly, the master commends him for his foresight. He praises the unjust steward. Then, jumping to the end of the chapter, you have the wealthy man who lived in absolute luxury, feasting every day.
While completely ignoring the starving beggar Lazarus right at his gate.
Yes. The wealthy man dies and ends up in conscious torment, begging for a single drop of water.
Okay, I have a hard time accepting the first half of that sandwich on a surface reading.
Most people do. It is jarring.
If the master praised the unjust steward for unilaterally rewriting debts and defrauding his boss, does that suggest that cutting corners or engaging in shady accounting for a good cause is acceptable?
It sounds like it, doesn't it?
Because looking at it plainly, Jesus appears to be praising a guy who is committing blatant white-collar crime.
That is the immense tension every honest reader feels when they hit that parable. It feels wrong. But we have to look closely at what is actually being praised in the text.
Okay, what is the specific praise for?
The text says the master praises the steward's prudence, his foresight for the future. He is not praising his dishonesty, which is the Greek word adikia.
So the praise is about the preparation, not the theft.
Yes. The steward realized a massive crisis was coming, his termination and imminent homelessness, and he used his temporary position and his temporary control over assets to prepare for that future reality.
He saw the writing on the wall and acted fast.
Right. Jesus says the children of light should be at least that shrewd in preparing for eternity. But without verses 10 through 13 acting as a dogmatic boundary right after the parable, praising the unjust steward looks like a blatant endorsement of fraud.
Right. Without those verses, it just looks like Jesus is saying, go ahead and cook the books if it helps you out later.
And furthermore, without verses 10 through 13, the story of Lazarus at the end looks like a moralistic condemnation of material goods, simply because they are material.
Like wealth itself is the sin.
Yes, which is not the case.
So verses 10 through 13 function as the guardrails for the whole chapter.
They do. They build a non-negotiable ethical guardrail against antinomianism.
Antinomianism, that is the idea that the law does not matter anymore, right?
Right. Antinomianism is the false theological idea that because we are saved by grace, the moral law of God no longer applies to our daily behavior.
Like we have a free pass to sin.
Yes. Jesus places these verses here to prove that kingdom shrewdness requires absolute moral rectitude. You cannot separate shrewd preparation for eternity from daily, granular ethical obedience.
With those guardrails securely in place, let us jump into the micro-level diagnostic in verse 10, because Jesus establishes a universal law of human character here.
A law that makes a lot of people squirm.
Oh, absolutely. The verse says, he that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much, and he that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much. We are looking at proportional fidelity.
The antithetical parallelism in this verse is striking. You have the one faithful in the absolute smallest, the elakistos, juxtaposed with the one who is faithful in much.
The elakistos, the tiny things.
Yes, and the one unrighteous, attikos, in the least, is unrighteous in much. Jesus is treating the smallest imaginable detail, not as an insignificant throwaway moment, but as the ultimate revealer of character.
The small thing is the X-ray of the soul.
It really is.
The human tendency is to believe in the illusion of volume. We constantly tell ourselves, if I had more money, I would be incredibly generous.
We all play that game. If I got a raise.
Yeah, if I won the lottery, I would fund a whole hospital wing or build an orphanage. We genuinely believe that a massive change in outward circumstances will magically fix our inward character flaws.
But Jesus rejects this lie entirely.
He dismantles it completely. Small matters do not create character from nothing. They disclose the character that is already present before God.
If you are stingy and selfish with $10, you will be stingy and selfish with $10 million.
The volume changes, the scale of the ledger changes, but the heart remains identical.
Wealth only amplifies what is already sitting on the throne of your heart.
That makes me think of structural engineering.
Oh, I like that. How so?
When engineers are designing a massive suspension bridge, they do not test its integrity by waiting for it to be finished and then driving 1,000 semi-trucks onto it to see if it collapses.
That would be catastrophic.
Right, it would be a disaster. Instead, they test the microscopic integrity of the smallest hidden rivet in a laboratory. They use ultrasound on the steel at a micro level to look for microscopic stress fractures.
Because the small flaws bring down the whole structure.
Well, yes. If the microscopic structure is flawed, the entire bridge is structurally compromised and will eventually fail under pressure. Jesus is applying that exact same engineering logic to the human soul. The small financial decision is the hidden rivet.
If we pull back and look at the broader biblical theology, this links directly to the principle found in James 2:10.
Oh, the verse about stumbling in one point.
Yes. That verse states that whoever keeps the whole law but fails in one point has become guilty of all of it. God's omniscience monitors those microscopic stress fractures you were talking about.
He sees all the hidden stuff.
He sees the hidden impulse buys late at night, the minor tax evasions where you claim a deduction you should not, the private generosity that no one else ever sees.
You might think an unnecessary online purchase is trivial, like it is completely disconnected from your spiritual life.
But God weighs that against your covenantal obligations to his kingdom. The micro-infidelity reveals a macro-rebellion against the sovereign lawgiver.
It shows that in the hidden spaces, you believe you are the master of your own fate.
Right. Following the rule of small things, let us analyze the specific small thing Jesus puts on trial in verses 11 and 12, money itself.
Jesus uses a very specific phrase here. He says, unrighteous mammon. Let us break down that Aramaic loanword, mamuna. Why does Jesus bring a foreign Aramaic word into a Greek discourse?
He does it to deliberately personify wealth as a rival deity.
A rival deity, so it is not just coins.
No, by keeping the Aramaic term instead of translating it into a standard Greek word for coins, silver, or property, he brands it as a competitive pagan idol. It is a living force competing for worship.
And he calls it unrighteous.
It is called unrighteous, not because physical coins or dollar bills are inherently evil in themselves, they're just metal and paper, but because wealth belongs to a fallen order. It is tangled up in a world broken by sin.
And it has a pull on us.
A massive pull. More than anything else, it easily deceives the human heart into idolatry. Mammon promises the very things that only God can actually provide: absolute security, elevated status, and sovereign control over the future.
And he follows that up in verse 12 with the concept of borrowed property. He calls wealth that which is another's, or allotrish in Greek.
This hits on the covenantal concept that human beings are merely tenant farmers on God's estate.
Psalm 24.1 states, "The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein."
Every single asset you hold is essentially leased equipment.
Leased equipment? I love that phrasing.
You do not truly own anything in this life. You arrived with nothing, and you will leave with nothing. God loans these temporal assets to us to evaluate our character.
So the money is a test.
Yes. Jesus then contrasts these temporal loans with true wealth, the elethanon, and your own, the hymeteron. He's explaining a really heavy mechanism here.
Which is what?
How a person handles the temporary loan, the unrighteous mammon, dictates their fitness for eternal, non-forfeitable blessings. Your fidelity with the leased equipment proves whether you can be trusted with the eternal inheritance.
I feel a strong need to push back here.
Go for it.
Many people listening have spent 30 years paying off a mortgage. They sacrificed, they worked double shifts, they finally got the deed to their house, and it is sitting safely in their filing cabinet.
They worked hard for that security.
They really did. And now we are saying they own absolutely nothing, that they are just tenant farmers. Is that not incredibly discouraging? It feels like we are stripping away the very security people work their whole lives to build.
It's entirely understandable why it feels discouraging or even threatening at first glance. We tie our identity to our ownership.
We really do. My house, my car, my retirement account.
But we have to reframe this according to the text. This lack of ownership is actually the ultimate freedom from panic.
Freedom from panic. How so?
Think about the implications. If your assets actually belong to God, then a massive market crash, hyperinflation, or a physical theft cannot annihilate your true identity or your eternal inheritance.
Because it wasn't yours to begin with.
Right. If your bank account is drained, it is God's portfolio that is taking the hit, not yours. Your permanent, non-forfeitable inheritance is kept totally safe in heaven, untouchable by rust or thieves.
That shifts the burden entirely.
Recognizing that earthly goods are borrowed frees you from the crushing, ulcer-inducing anxiety of trying to secure your own universe. You are a steward, not the sovereign.
That is a massive relief when you realize the weight of protecting the universe is not on your shoulders. God can handle his own portfolio.
He certainly can.
So, moving from the evaluation of assets, we arrive at the climactic absolute binary in verse 13. This is the question of final subjection. Jesus says, no domestic slave can be devoted to two masters.
The specific Greek word chosen here is highly illustrative, oikotos.
Oikotos, what does that imply?
This is a domestic slave, one who lives entirely inside the household. Contrast this with a field worker or a hired day laborer.
Like someone just comes in for a shift?
Yes. A hired hand might punch a clock, work their shift, and then escape the supervisor's gaze at the end of the day to go live their own private life.
They get to go home and be their own boss.
But an oikotes lives constantly under the master's roof. There is no off-the-clock time. Every waking moment is subject to the master's will.
And Jesus lays out the psychological law of this arrangement with incredibly intense verbs: hate and love, despise and cling to.
Very polar opposites.
He says you will either hate the one and love the other, or you will cling to one and despise the other. In this Semitic idiom, exalting one master necessitates the total rejection of the other. There is no middle ground.
The grammar underlying this statement is what makes it so absolute. Jesus does not say working for two masters is highly difficult.
He does not say it is a tough balancing act.
Right. He does not say it is emotionally exhausting or inefficient or that it will cause scheduling conflicts. He says it is a continuous ontological impossibility.
Ontological impossibility. It just cannot exist.
The verb is in the present passive indicative. You simply cannot do it. It goes against the very nature of reality. The human heart is designed with a throne, not a conference table. There is only room for one sovereign to rule at a time.
A conference table implies a democracy of the soul.
Which is what we all want.
We do. It implies you can have God sitting at the head of the table, mammon taking notes on the side, maybe a little personal ambition sitting across from them, all negotiating a pleasant, balanced compromise.
A nice, comfortable board meeting in your heart.
But Jesus shuts that down. It is a throne. I think of this dual allegiance like trying to install two different competing operating systems on a single computer.
Oh, that is a great analogy.
Yeah, and demanding they run the exact same hardware simultaneously. You allocate the exact same RAM, the same processor space, and the same hard drive to both systems, and you tell them to command the machine at the same moment.
What happens?
It does not just run slowly. It results in a total catastrophic system crash. The architecture of the machine cannot support two supreme commands. They cannot share the core.
That is a perfect representation of what happens to the human soul. If you enthrone mammon, if money dictates your security, your mood, your decisions, and your status, you are actively executing God's authority in your life.
You are pushing him off the throne.
You cannot submit to God and mammon. Every financial decision is either a vote of confidence in God's provision or a vote of confidence in mammon's illusion of security.
Hearing this standard perfect allegiance, absolute faithfulness in the smallest details, a heart completely devoted to one master, is terrifying.
It should be terrifying to our flesh.
Because honestly, looking at my own track record of impulse buys, minor selfishness, financial anxiety, and the times I have trusted a savings account more than I trusted God, I realize I have failed the test.
We all have.
I have not been perfectly faithful in the absolute smallest things. If this is the standard for the eternal inheritance, the human track record is universally flawed. We need to pivot to where our hope actually lies, or this is just a deep dive into despair.
This is where we must transition to the Christological fulfillment of the text, where we have universally failed. Jesus perfectly executed these commands.
He lived it out flawlessly.
We see the ultimate contrast during his temptation in the wilderness. Satan took Jesus to a high mountain and offered him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory.
That was mammon presented on a cosmic scale.
Exactly. The temptation was to bypass the agonizing path of the cross, grab the wealth, the status, and the authority immediately, and compromise his worship. Satan was offering a conference table.
But Jesus refused. He rejected the compromise, quoting Deuteronomy back at the tempter. He refused the unrighteous mammon, choosing instead the path of poverty, suffering, and the cross, and perfect submission to the Father.
This raises a vital point regarding the danger of moralism. We have to warn everyone listening against turning this text into a self-help checklist for financial discipline in an attempt to somehow earn salvation.
Right, like I just need to budget better to be saved.
If you hear this discussion and think, I just need to organize my spreadsheet better, cut out my coffee runs, and give an extra 5% so God will accept me, you have missed the gospel entirely.
Yeah.
You are trying to buy off the judge with better behavior.
Right, because no amount of aggressive budgeting or financial self-discipline is going to atone for a heart that has already committed idolatry.
Spot on. If we look at the theological concepts outlined in Westminster Confession chapter 11, we are reminded of the doctrine of justification.
Justification by faith alone.
Yes, we are justified by grace alone, through faith alone. We are not justified by infusing righteousness into our own accounts through our good works or our perfect financial management.
So what does justify us?
Christ's flawless active and passive obedience is credited to the believer.
Could you unpack that for us? Active and passive obedience.
Sure. His active obedience means he lived the perfect life we could not live. He was flawlessly faithful in the smallest things. He never once trusted mammon. He always honored the Father perfectly.
He passed the test, we failed.
Yes. And his passive obedience means he willingly suffered the wrath and penalty for our financial idolatry and unfaithfulness on the cross. When you trust in him, his perfect ledger is handed to you.
That is the great exchange.
It is. Faithful budgeting, radical generosity, and financial integrity are the visible fruit of this union with Christ, not the root cause of your salvation. The cross is what breaks mammon's grip over the human heart, freeing you to use money without worshiping it.
Since Christ frees the believer from the penalty of the law and the tyranny of mammon, we have to look at the tangible actions and widespread corrections required in the modern church and in our individual lives.
The theology demands a practical response.
It does. This leads us to contemporary application and a severe indictment of modern pragmatism. The first step for anyone listening is a rigorous personal audit.
A very uncomfortable audit.
Very. We need to challenge ourselves to view our bank statements, our credit card bills, and our calendar blocks as highly revealing theological documents.
They absolutely are theological documents. Where your money goes reveals what you actually worship far more accurately than what you sing.
Secret covetousness exposes a hollow public confession.
You can sing the most doctrinally sound hymns on Sunday, you can serve on committees, but if your financial choices from Monday through Saturday are driven by greed, status-seeking, or relentless self-indulgence, your ledger is testifying against your public confession.
Your bank account is screaming that mammon is still on the throne.
It is.
We also have to address the elephant in the room when it comes to financial theology. This text aggressively condemns the prosperity gospel and the word of faith movement.
It dismantles it completely. The prosperity gospel actively worships the pagan deity mammon, but it disguises it under a stolen Christian vocabulary.
They use the right words but mean something entirely different.
They teach people to use God as a tool, a cosmic vending machine to acquire wealth, completely reversing the biblical order.
Reversing the order. Because Jesus says wealth is a temporary test, least equipment, to see if you are fit for eternal realities.
But the prosperity gospel says eternal realities exist simply to bring you temporary wealth and comfort right now.
It is a devastating theological bait and switch.
It leads millions into spiritual ruin by feeding the very idolatry Jesus came to destroy.
The critique does not stop at the extreme edges of the word of faith movement. There is a much broader critique here regarding modern church business models in mainstream evangelicalism.
The seeker-sensitive movement, for example.
Yeah, the seeker-sensitive movement often relies heavily on high-tech entertainment, massive corporate administrative structures, demographic polling, and the softening of theology to appease affluent donors and keep the seats full.
When a church begins to view its congregation as consumers, and it measures its success by market efficiency, capital campaigns, and attendance graphs. It has invited Mammon to sit on the elder board.
That is a chilling thought. Mammon on the elder board.
The institution begins to serve the bottom line rather than the truth.
I can hear a pragmatic pastor pushing back on this, though. They might say, we live in a corporate age. Can't modern churches use corporate marketing tools neutrally to reach a wider audience?
It is a very common argument.
They will say, we have these incredible platforms, we have demographic data, we have targeted advertising. Why not use the tools of the culture to spread a good message to as many people as possible?
The fatal flaw in that reasoning is the assumption that the tools are neutral.
They aren't.
The reality is that the medium dictates the message. When you rely on market-driven metrics to evaluate your success, you inevitably start altering your message to keep those metrics pointing upward.
Because if the numbers drop, you think you are failing.
Oh well, yes. You begin to avoid preaching on sin, repentance, the wrath of God, or the absolute life-altering demands of Christ. Why? Because those topics do not poll well with affluent consumers looking for an uplifting weekend experience.
So you sand down the hard edges.
You sand down the hard edges of the gospel so that customers keep coming back and giving. When the tools of corporate marketing dictate the atmosphere, the music, and the content of the gathering, Mammon is running the organization.
It has taken over the whole operation.
A faithful church must rely strictly on the Word and the Holy Spirit, refusing to bow to those market-driven metrics, even if it results in a smaller budget, less cultural influence, and a smaller building.
That is a massive reality check for both the individual and the institution. We have covered a vast amount of ground today.
We really have.
We walked through the historical pressure cooker of first-century Judea and the crushing tax burdens. We saw the structural brilliance of Luke 16, using the unjust steward and Lazarus to frame the core warning.
Right, the chiasm.
We looked at the...
And every single piece of that connects back to the core truth we started with. God's providence monitors the smallest details of our lives, and our use of those details reveals who truly sits on the throne of our hearts.
To bring this all together, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to consider long after this audio finishes.
Something to mull over.
If the wealth of this world is unrighteous mammon, a temporary currency that will eventually fail and turn to dust, what are you doing right now to convert it into something permanent? Think about exchanging currencies at an airport.
Oh, that is a great way to picture it.
You are leaving the country of this world, and the currency you hold will be completely worthless where you are going. Are you actively laundering your temporary, borrowed wealth into eternal friendships, supporting the gospel and relieving the poor, so that when the sky rolls up like a scroll, you have a treasury that a physical bank vault could never hold? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Reformed thinking. We will catch you next time.